Coming up on the Authorpreneur podcast. At this stage, I'm not going to create a pro-con list that's obnoxiously long because I feel like you can do that on your own and you don't need that from me. I feel like that wouldn't be a good use of my time or your time. But what I am going to do is I'm going to focus on something that's really important that you need to be aware of when you go into outlining. And I think this is the biggest pitfall of outlining. Welcome to the Authorpreneur podcast. I'm your host, mystery author Amelia D. Hay. On this podcast, I will bring you writing, book marketing, and self-publishing advice so that you can create your dream author business, build your author platform, and be creatively independent. You can find the episode show notes and lots more information on the podcast page at authorpreneurpodcast.com/podcast. Hello, writers. I'm recording this on the 20th of January, and I kid you not, I've just had to turn my fan on between takes of my podcast because I'm sweating. I know that's so TMI, but that's indicative of the week I've had. Like, everything's gone wrong. Well, maybe not wrong, but all the plans I had sort of went out the window for various reasons. I'm filled with a lot of anxiety at the moment, partly because, well, if you go looking for trouble, you tend to find it. And I found a bit of trouble, and I don't want to give any platform to it, but it's sucked the joy out of podcasting for me. And this is something I used to really love. At one stage, I really enjoyed setting up the equipment and talking to you through my podcast. But now it's become a lot less fun, but I don't want to give up because I've spent a long time. I've worked out that I've probably spent about 800 plus hours on this podcast, and I'm not prepared to give it up because this has taken such a long time to build to this point. There's a part of me that wants to hold on and keep going, but at the same time, I just feel very flat. So if you're listening to this episode and maybe you're going to hear it in my voice, hopefully I can kind of push through and be really happy and talk about this topic because it's a topic that's really important. Figuring out whether you want to outline a novel. It's a huge step. It's a huge chunk in your writing life. Sorry, there's a huge hum in the background. I'm so annoyed. Hopefully I can edit it out and post. When you make the decision to outline or not, you're either adding extra hours before you start writing, or potentially if you don't have an established writing into the dark or pantsing a novel technique, you can add extra minutes, hours, whatever it is, into the revision phase. And that's why I think this topic is important. So if you do notice that I'm a bit down, just know it is something kind of related to my podcast and branding. I don't particularly want to give it a spotlight because I sort of feel like it's going to detract from what I'm trying to do with my podcast. It has nothing to do with my relationship with my husband or my personal life. That happens to be the one thing in my life that is going well, but it's definitely related to the podcast. So I just wanted to share that with you because you've been listening through. This is the 82nd episode of my podcast, and I'm quite proud of that. And I submitted, I should share this in my behind the scenes author diary, but I've submitted my podcast to Amazon Music and I'm so proud actually. I've searched for it. I know this is super nerdy. I've searched for it and you can see my podcast on the first page if you type in Authorpreneur just on Amazon.com. You don't necessarily need to go to music.amazon.com to see it, but I'm really happy that I have this opportunity to reach an audience on a different platform because I know Amazon Music is Android based. But yes, just know I wanted to share this with you because you've been following me on my journey for a long time now, since 2017. And I do feel that you deserve a bit of insider information, but just know it's nothing to do with me not loving the topic. It's more that I'm not necessarily burnt out. It's just I have this other thing going on that's sucking the joy out of podcasting for me in a very big way. It's annoying, but it is what it is. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. Before I dive into discussing how to outline a novel or the planning phase of writing, I thought it would be best to ask an obvious but nonetheless important question. Is outlining a good idea? Depending upon who you listen to, you will hear conflicting advice. Some authors will say that in order to write quicker, you need to ditch the outlining phase, while others abide by the age-old saying, fail to plan, plan to fail. So which option is best for you? In this episode, I will share the things you need to consider, an important question that you need to ask yourself, a piece of advice that you need to keep in mind, and my recommendations for new writers. On top of this, I talk about the downsides of creating an outline in order to give you a balanced and somewhat unbiased answer to this age-old question. And I'm going to try and be as unbiased as possible. Before we get into the content, if you're interested in reading the transcript or would like links to anything that I've mentioned in the show, then check out the very long blog post or edited transcript at authorpreneurpodcast.com/TAP033. If you're on YouTube, you'll notice that I've gone back to an audio-only version of the podcast. I've had to pull the plug on the video podcast episode because I've had issues with outside noise interfering with the episodes. In the audio podcast, these noises are easier to filter out than in the video, but you can still hear them. But in the video, it's so much worse. And due to the nature of the editing, there's obviously like the visual and the audio editing, you can really hear jumps in the background noise, and it's just not a pleasurable viewing and listening experience. For those of you who are new to this podcast, I want to say a huge thank you for stopping by and trying out my show. To those of you who've been faithfully listening, thank you for regularly listening in and supporting me. Your support means more to me than you know. Before you decide whether outlining is for you or even give it a try, there are 3 things you need to consider. These are how you write, any struggles you might have with your current writing process, and the story's genre. So how do you write? This question is a bit of a catch-22, especially if you're yet to finish a novel. If you haven't written a book, consider what you will like in other areas of your life. Do you enjoy having no plans at all and going wherever the wind will take you? Or does that scenario fill you with fear? Are you a lover of spreadsheets, planning, or keeping a diary? Perhaps you identify with both of these things to a certain degree. When you're deciding whether you should outline or not, I think it's really important that you consider these things. So to help you consider these various elements, I'm going to break this down for you even further. If you don't like having plans or feel suffocated by the concept of a tight schedule, then discovering the story as you write or writing by the seat of your pants might be a better option for you. At the moment, I'm experimenting with discovery writing because I want to give this season of the podcast a balanced view, and I'm a chronic outliner, as you'll see in the next few episodes. Before I started experimenting with writing into the dark, I took a course by Dean Wesley Smith on the topic. The course is by WMG Publishing, which is a company owned and operated by Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush. The workshop is called Writing into the Dark and costs $60 including taxes. Over on Amazon, Dean Wesley Smith has published a non-fiction book similar to the course. The book is priced at $5.99 and that's in US dollars. Michael LeBron has created an in-depth review of the book on his Author Level Up YouTube channel. If you're on the fence about the book or course, I highly recommend checking out the video before you make a purchase. Perhaps you already write by the seat of your pants. Should you try and outline your next book? To help you discover the best answer, I have another question for you. Does your current writing process work for you? If it does, then why fix something that's not broken? You can only write your way. You cannot write like somebody else. Stop listening to people who tell you that you have to do things a particular way. Just because a technique works for somebody else doesn't mean it will work for you. See that as a red flag. And I hope that when you listen to my podcast, you realize that I'm talking about what works for me or discussing research that I need to do before I write. And when I did the season 1 episode on story structure, I needed to know all of that information before I started writing a book. And this was research research I did for myself. And as I created that season, I created the scripts based on research that I had done before I started writing the episode. That season, it really did take a lot of effort on my part. And I'm not just saying that to brag or make myself look good. I want you to understand that I don't just take my word for it. I do go and look at what other people say and talk about it on my podcast. It's not just based on my limited writing experience. The advice I share on this podcast is not set in stone, and I'm not saying that you need to strictly adhere to it. And I think it is worth having this conversation because I want you to understand that I'm doing this with the best of intentions. I'm going to assume that you're considering creating an outline because something in your writing process is not working for you. Now, I have another important question for you. Are you spending too much time in the revision or rewriting phase? If this is your scenario, you could try writing to an outline, but first tweak your current writing process before you do that. So if you're already pantsing and you're spending way too much time than you like in the revision phase, I recommend that you check out the course or the book by Dean Wesley Smith on writing into the dark. His technique is a little more involved than just flipping open your laptop and writing. It contains a series of steps that help you fix plot holes as you go along, thus reducing the amount of time you spend in the revision stages. And after this, if this doesn't work for you, you could try writing to a loose outline. But even though I'm recommending his course and the book, I've taken the course, I'm yet to put it into practice. Well, I'm currently putting it into practice, and I can see moments where I do struggle with writing into the dark. And I think this could be a case of practice makes perfect. Maybe not perfect, but with practice, I will probably get better at it. So it's something that I probably should commit to and just see how it goes. But what if the thought of flipping open your laptop and writing fills you with anxiety? Then you may need to outline. You don't necessarily need to outline every plot point, chapter, scene, and emotional beat in your story. But if that's what makes you happy, feel free to write things this way. And when I started out, I needed this to write. Like I did try the flipping open my computer and writing. I went from writing screenplays to trying to write a novel that way, and I found it really difficult because the screenwriting technique that I learned involves an outline, and it was a real struggle for me, and I gave up on that first novel. It was a romantic comedy. And while it's a genre I don't mind watching on the occasion, but it's a genre I don't particularly read. And I think that made a huge difference in regards to why I struggled with that book. Reflect on the last book you wrote. Where did you get stuck? Do you struggle with ideas or get blocked along the way and can't write? Perhaps you love the planning phase but struggle with getting to the writing chair and keep putting it off. Or do you love writing the first draft but hate rewriting? It's important that before you consider changing your writing habits, you understand where you struggle, because knowing these things in advance will help you see the difference between your old habits and struggles and the issues that come with trying something new. If this is your first book, or perhaps you're not sure about where you struggle in regards to writing, I highly recommend journaling as you write your next story. Keep track of where you get stuck, any fears and other things that crop up as you write. Journaling is a good way of looking back and seeing where you're getting stuck. Over time, you'll see a pattern emerge in your journal. And I know a lot of people, when they talk about journaling as you write, they talk about recording word counts, hours that you spent writing, what you actually did. And I think it's good to measure these things as well, because what you don't measure, you can't improve, because you've got no data to make great decisions from. And I think that's important. But also, I think you should get into the emotional side of writing, especially if you didn't want to write and you spent 8 hours doing something, doing all these other things, and you didn't get to writing that day. Especially if you've decided that you want to write on a Sunday and that's the only time you have, and you're filling your schedule with all these other things. And a journal is a good way to unpack why you're doing this, because I do this sometimes, and I know it's because it's several reasons. and it is complicated. The first reason is I'm lazy. I love procrastinating. I'm practically a professional at this stage. If I can put it off, you bet I will find a way to put it off. I'm a genius when it comes to procrastination. I know that sounds ridiculous, and perhaps I'm being a bit too self-depreciating when I say that, but that's worth knowing. Also, I've had a few experiences now in my writing career that have given a platform for fear to set in, and I've become scared to publish. Partly because I punish myself and I will read the reviews and I'll obsess over them. There will be, like with my latest book, I know we're not talking about this particular topic, but it helps. So I have 17 ratings with a straight 4-star average, and Missing has a 3.71 rating. So this book is already better than the previous book that I've published. Readers like it more. And I wrote this with Missing in mind, what I learnt with Missing. So I have 6 5-star ratings, 6 4-star ratings. So that's 12. So that's 70% of people gave my book 4-star or higher. But what I obsess over are the snarky comments in the 3 and 2-star reviews. But as I go through, there are a few reviews that I will obsess over because there are just comments in there that really get to me, and I let these comments take up residence in my mind. So when I get around to writing, it's an ordeal, and I've done this to myself. At the same time, I can't look away, so I'm torturing myself, and this sort of comes into why I put off writing, why I can put off writing. And when you're journaling as you write, if you're doing this is going to come up, because when you journal and you're stuck and you don't want to write, what I recommend doing is asking the obvious question, why don't I want to write today? And just list as many reasons that your mind can come up with. And eventually, as you write those reasons, some of them will really hurt. Telling you that hurts because it's embarrassing. I let strangers dictate how I feel about my own work. It's almost unprofessional, and I'm embarrassed by that. It hurts. And I think this is part of the reason. So that hurts, right? And that's probably the reason. Also, you have lockdown as well. Even though the world is starting to open up again, it's still a scary place with that virus running rampant. And if you live in a country where they're not taking the measures seriously, it's hard. Like, we haven't been on a vacation, like a proper vacation outside of the home in such a long time. And all of this has an impact on writing. And if you go through and journal and you list all of these reasons, eventually you're going to get to the truth about why you're not writing. And I'm lucky enough to have a partner who, I think he understands this because he's done a PhD. So in order to do that, he's had to write a thesis and then defend his own work. So he understands the concept of writing something and then having to explain to people, this is why you need to listen to what I'm saying, and then publish it and hear the feedback. He understands. And often when I'm in that place where I can't write, he'll just say to me, why don't you just write a line, like just one line, and just write for a bit. And having someone like that in my life is really helpful. So I'm going to pay it forward. If you're struggling to write, why don't you pause the podcast right here and open your laptop, computer, smartphone, whatever it is that you write on, pen, paper, whatever, and just write the next line. Forget scenes, chapters, paragraphs. Just write the next line and just see where it goes. So take your eyes off that huge goal of finishing your first draft, getting to the revision stage, booking your editor, pressing publish, daydreaming about writing back to your fans, getting on the USA Today bestseller list, whatever, making a TV series or a Netflix series on your books, whatever this huge grand goal that you sort of daydream about at the back of your mind, forget about that and just focus on the next line, because my husband's right. I just have to write one line at a time. That's all I do. And I think when I get in this space where I can't write, I'm making my job so much more complicated than what it needs to be. If you've heard something useful in this episode that was helpful to you and you'd like to support the show, then buy me a coffee for as little as $2 at buymeacoffee.com/author80hey. Sometimes your novel's genre will impact whether you need to write an outline or not. For instance, books within the broader romance category require a meet-cute emotional tension and a happily ever after or a happy for now ending. If you read a lot of romance novels, you might not need an outline to start writing, but if you don't read in the genre, you might be better off outlining the major plot elements in your story to help you write with reader expectations in mind. What if you write a genre that has a more intricate plot, like a mystery? Then I recommend outlining the significant elements in the story before you start writing, especially if you are new to writing in the mystery genre. So why do I recommend this? A mystery requires red herrings, believable character motivations, clues for the reader to find, and timelines for the crime, victim, and perp to be planned out in advance. It's a lot of information to hold in your head at once, and an outline can help you to track all of these moving pieces of the story. But at the same time, just because I haven't tried to write a murder mystery into the dark doesn't mean it's not doable. I'm telling you, this is what I've realized has worked. And I have created a novella that readers seem to like that is free of plot holes, and what has been a comment is how intricate the story is and how many moving parts. So if you are writing something complicated, perhaps an outline is the right thing to do. But when you write into the dark or you write by the seat of your pants, you almost have to trust that you're going to place all of these elements where they need to be. And I guess I'm more of a realist, and maybe I don't trust myself to do that yet. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe this is why I'm so stuck on outlining. It could be a trust thing. What do you need in order to feel confident to start writing? Maybe confidence is the wrong word. Let me rephrase that. What do you need in order to feel more comfortable or less fearful before you start writing? Do you feel no fear and look forward to discovering the story? Or do you need a vague idea or loose outline before you start? This vague idea or loose outline could be an opening scene idea, concept, or an outline of the major plot points. But what if, after creating this loose outline, you feel anxious or fearful? This is how I feel after creating a short outline. If you feel this way, outline the entire story from beginning to end. It's okay to do this your way. There is no right or wrong way to write a novel. As long as in the end you create a book that your readers love by crafting a coherent story structure and tying up loose ends in the final act. How you reach this point is up to you. There are literally no rules. And most importantly, your outline is not set in stone. It's not a straitjacket. Ideas have a way of shifting as you progress from outlining to writing the first draft. It's okay to stray from it as long as it serves the story. If and when you stray from your outline, you need to go back through the story and make adjustments where necessary. This is where foreshadowing comes into play. While outlining has many benefits like minimizing plot holes and time spent in revisions, there are a few downsides that you need to be aware of before you decide whether it's right for you. At this stage, I'm not going to create a pro-con list that's obnoxiously long because I feel like you can do that on your own and you don't need that from me. I feel like that wouldn't be a good use of my time or your time. But what I am going to do is I'm going to focus on something that's really important that you need to be aware of when you go into outlining. And I think this is the biggest pitfall of outlining. Outlining can take the fun out of writing because there is no discovery phase. You know what's going to happen because you've already discovered the story. In fact, it can become an obstacle where eventually you don't want to write anymore. Like in most things, preempting obstacles is the key to success. What do I mean by preempting obstacles? Earlier in this episode, I discussed your potential struggles with writing. These are the obstacles you will face along the way. If you're not sure where you will struggle, do the journaling exercise. This will help you discover the writing obstacles you may face. The best way to overcome an obstacle is to plan how you're going to react in advance. So what are you going to do to ensure that you finish the first draft? How will you react when you feel stuck or are struggling with procrastination? What are you going to do when you see your writing obstacle floating towards you on the horizon? If you don't know what happens next in your story, it's okay to take the time to think about it. Maybe watch a film, read a book, take a nap, but come back to writing. Don't use this as an excuse to put off writing until you feel like doing the work. There will always be reasons why you need to do something else. Trust me, I'm a professional procrastinator. For those of you who are new to writing, it might interest you to know where I get stuck in the first draft phase. The end of the first act, the midpoint, and the transition to the last act are all places where I get stuck. I'm not saying you will too. Knowing this may help you. At the 25th mark, writing officially becomes less fun. The 50% mark, I'm starting to really struggle because I already know what happens in the story and I think I'm sort of procrastinating there. And at the 75% mark, I feel a lot of pressure to wrap everything up. And I think that's why I struggle there as well. Because I'm a pessimist, it's easier for me to start with the negatives, but it's important to discuss both sides of an argument and give both sides equal weight. The most significant upside for outlining a novel is you don't have to write the story in order. If you're stuck writing a particular scene, but you're eager to write another scene that's further on in the story, you can do that. I've been upfront about my lack of experience discovering a story as you write. In light of that, I can't see how you could jump ahead in a story that you're discovering. For me, it's just not possible. This ability to jump ahead keeps you writing even though you're stuck in a different part of the story. While you don't have to write every day, keeping this momentum up is essential in the early stages of your writing journey, and outlining can help you achieve that. The thing with creating momentum in your writing life is it becomes a habit. So you're more likely to have your writing on autopilot. So it's like, think of what you do when you wake up. For me, I jump out of bed, I get dressed, I have breakfast. I think sometimes I slip into work mode soon after, and I don't have to think about it because these certain elements are on autopilot. And when you have momentum in your writing life, you're putting something that's really important to your authorpreneur business on autopilot. So if you can attach writing to something that you already do without even thinking about, like what would be really smart is if I changed my schedule. So if in the morning I made my bed, got dressed, had breakfast, then started writing, then went back and did my housekeeping tasks, that probably would prevent me from procrastinating because I'm already doing something that I love to put off. Even though I love having written, I love creating and the creative side of it and coming up with the story idea, especially when it comes with outlining, but the first draft phase, if I attach this to something I already do without question, it may actually be easier, but that's just speculation. And I would probably tell a coaching client that actually, and there is a book. It's so good actually, and I keep forgetting the title. So a book that I recommend you read on habits it's called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I'm 80% sure I just butchered his last name. Sorry. Not that he's listening to my podcast. But that book really, he goes into the science of habit. And he's an award-winning New York Times business reporter. And I've heard him speak at Google actually in London. And he's such a good speaker. And I'm a huge fan of this book because this is where he talks about, the subtitle is Why We Do What We Do and How to Change. And he has so many great things in this book. I really recommend that you listen to it if you like listening to audiobooks. The audiobook is like $7.99 British pounds. So that's one Audible credit. And this book has 16,174 ratings and it was published in February 2013. I really cannot recommend this book enough. And there are a lot of people that agree with me on Amazon. But it's something when I was doing business and life coaching, it's something that I recommend that people read in order to understand why they do what they do and how they can change. But clearly I'm not good at practicing what I preach. Maybe I'm going to listen to that book again, actually. I'm going to add that book to my reading list. I'm going to do it right now. So what if you're a brand new writer? What is my advice to you? How do you feel about outlining? Would you rather fling open your laptop and start writing? Or does writing without an outline fill you with a sense of dread? With the answers to these questions in mind, I recommend that if you've never written a novel, then you should try outlining. Flesh out the main plot points of your story, then sit back and ask yourself the following question. Can you write a story based upon this information? Or, like me, are you panicking about what you should write between these plot points? If so, add scenes between these plot points into your outline. Then start writing your first draft. Try to avoid obsessing over getting the perfect outline because perfection is a myth we believe in when we are scared to take the next step. I hope this episode gives you a few things to consider as you decide whether you should outline your first or next book. In the next 2 writing tip episodes, I will discuss how I go from a story idea to a fully fleshed out outline, or in layman's terms, how I outline a novel. As always, I have a few important questions to ask. Are you on the fence about whether you should create an outline before you start writing your first draft? Or have you found a way to write with or without an outline that works for you? I want to hear from you. Come on over to the blog post at authorpreneurpodcast.com/TAP033 and share your tips or struggles in the comments section. Thank you for listening and happy reading and writing, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Authorpreneur podcast. If you love this episode, then hit the subscribe button and leave a review on your favourite podcasting app. I'm your host, Amelia D. Hay, and I'll see you next week for another episode.